if you can hear the background heater in my office. This heating system is really noisy. So, but
can't hear it really, Lena.
You can hear it? Oh, good. It's just, well, I'll mute myself here as soon as Abbie gets started. So,
okay.
Well, it's 3:11, so I don't want to delay further. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speaker today. Welcome to seminar, everyone. Today, our guest is Abbie Stack. She works at Crop Science in California. And her job is as a discovery plant pathology research lead. She is originally from Indiana, and she studied at Purdue, right, for her bachelor's. And then she went off to the West Coast and did her master's in plant pathology at UC Davis. And then she has a few steps in her career into industry and ended up there. So I'm going to let her tell you all about that. And welcome, Abbie. And it's all yours.
Thanks. Thanks for the intro. And thanks everybody for coming today. And thanks for inviting me to speak. I always feel really special when someone invites me to talk at something. Like it hasn't sunk in that I'm a professional in a career still sometimes. So this is a really fun event for me. I'm going to talk a little bit about science today, but also a little bit about some lessons that I've learned as an early career professional that I think would really benefit some of the other people on this call, hopefully. But I want to start with background info, even though you've gotten like a brief history. I want to delve a little more deep into that. So I'm originally from Lafayette, Indiana, and this is the most Midwestern picture of me that exists. I'm growing corn, which is something we did every year, and next to my family's pig-shaped mailbox. And my family was very into agriculture. My grandpa was a farmer. My mom grew up on the farm. If you drove like 2 minutes in any direction from my house, it was just corn and soybean fields everywhere. And Lafayette is right next to the town of West Lafayette, which is where Purdue University is located. And fun fact, if one of your parents works at Purdue, you get half off tuition. So it's kind of a no-brainer. And I'm also the 17th member of my family to graduate from Purdue. So we have a long legacy and we bleed black and gold. Sorry if anybody is not a Purdue fan here. So when I was at Purdue, I actually started as a chemistry major, and I really rapidly noticed that I was having trouble with calculus that was involved with that. And so I went to my academic advisor and I was like, what else could I possibly study? Because I can't do this math at all. And we found this major called interdisciplinary science, where you could get a concentration in 2 different things, and you could select from a whole list of different science categories. And I still wanted to do chemistry. I really loved that part of it. But I really wanted to pick something else for my secondary concentration. And as I'm going through the list, I see these words, plant pathology. And I'm sure a lot of you had a similar moment where you're like, I've never even heard of that. What is that? I had one of those moments too, but I was like, I like plants. It sounds kind of interesting. I would get to do stuff with my hands, which I like. And so I'll give it a whirl. Why not? And I actually, between my sophomore and junior year, had an internship at DuPont, which is now part of Corteva or whatever, in Newark, Delaware. And I worked in their fungicide discovery team, which is both a chemistry type of job and also a plant pathology type of job. And what I learned while I was there was that I really loved working in industry. Like everything was happening so fast. I got to work with a ton of really smart scientists. And what I really found out there was that I actually really loved plant pathology. Like this was really fun to work on these types of projects. And so when I went back to Purdue, I was like, I need to get some more plant pathology experience. And I started to work at the Purdue Plant and Pest Diagnostic Lab under Tom Cresswell and Gail Rule. If you guys know them, they're amazing diagnosticians. And I just soaked up all of the knowledge from them like a little sponge, learning about just so many different crops and so many different pathogens. And I did my first ever PCR when I worked in their lab. So it was a really fun experience. And knowing that I really wanted to be a plant pathologist, obviously there's no undergraduate major for that. I think that's still true. And so I needed to get at least a master's degree. And I came out to UC Davis, and my professor I worked for, Dr. Rick Bostock, he had a project looking at a fusarium canker disease of almond trees. And being from the Midwest, I had literally never even seen an almond tree in real life until I got out to California and started doing research on them. So I had a lot to learn once again. And it was a really cool project. I don't know if any of you guys know stuff about almond tree production, probably not. They actually grow these seedlings in fields, dig them all up, and put them into a warehouse, like bare root into a warehouse over the winter so that they get the proper number of chilling hours, because it doesn't get cold enough in California for them to get those hours to be able to later in their lives produce nuts. And that system was creating a lot of problems where it was really conducive for this fungus to grow. And so I did some studies and found out like which Fusarium species were the ones that were causing the disease, figured out some of the epidemiology, and also showed the significance of bark desiccation, which is basically a water stress measurement, and showed that like putting them into those warehouses, you really have to be treating these trees properly in order for this disease to not be a problem. They were losing like millions and millions of dollars worth of trees before I worked on this project. So I felt really like just excited that I was able to figure something out and actually help farmers in my area. And my professor offered to let me stay and get a PhD. Like we had enough funding that I could keep working on this project, but I was pretty tired of working on trees. Like working on trees is hard. Trees are very slow crop. Like it's not like I can just go out and grow a tomato. It's not the same as that. And I really had like other personal life goals I wanted to work towards. So I decided to start a career in industry, which is again, like I loved working at DuPont. So I felt really excited about this decision. And Monsanto at the time was only about 15 minutes north of where UC Davis is located. And there's a ton of agriculture in California, and all of, the big industry names that you hear of, they're all located in this region. So it's a great place to try to get a job. And yeah, I work on the discovery pathology team. So there is an applied side of the pathology team. And what they do is they screen through breeder materials to ensure that certain resistances to certain pathogens are still in the germplasm, or we're trying to find new resistances and things like that. But the discovery side, what we do is a lot of innovation. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Outside of my like normal day job, I also do a ton of outreach and volunteering. So I'm a local chapter president of the Association for Women in Science. If you're a woman in science in this room, quote unquote, you should look up this organization. It's national. There are chapters all around the country, and they do a lot of work for like personal development, career development, charity, advocacy, policy, keeping women in STEM. And they also have mentorship programs, various mentorship programs, and a lot of these have been turned into virtual programs, so you can get matched with someone, from all around the country, and just talk to them about different things and careers and all sorts of stuff. I'm also super involved in APS, which is why I was invited to this today. And I am the immediate past chair of the Early Career Professionals Committee. I just joined the annual meeting board, so that's going to be my new kind of fun APS experience. I was just talking to some of these other folks who are on the call early about how much I love California because it has so much awesome hiking. And yeah, I have had a really like successful and rewarding career thus far. And I want to talk a little bit about innovation in the ag industry, because it happens really rapidly, and it's really cool to see yourself go from where we started to where we are now. And when I started at Bayer, which was about 5.5 years ago now, all of our disease diagnostics, we were doing like the old school methods. We were doing ELISA, we were doing PCR, we were doing immunostrips, we were looking at fungal morphology and stuff like that. But I've gotten to personally test and implement 3 different technologies in the last 5 years that have like completely transformed the way that we do diagnostics. And you can see me holding a couple of these cool devices, the lamp, the Genie machine. On the left, the Mark 1C, which is a nanopore device. And then on the right is my new fun toy that I just got a couple months ago, which is the Voltrax, which is the automated library prep robot for the nanopore. Yeah, it's super cool to see how much like money and time we're saving, but also this really benefits like the growers that we work for, because we're able to return these diagnostics back faster, like lightning fast compared to where we used to be. So my team at Bayer, the other sort of side of what we do is we work on creating and improving bioassays. So if there's like an emerging disease problem anywhere globally, we are the ones who are responsible for figuring out how to screen large numbers of plants for resistance to that new disease. Or if there's a bioassay that isn't working properly, something's going wrong, then we're in charge of testing different variables to figure out which ones or how to make it better or improve it. We also use some other kind of fun molecular techniques. So one of my first projects when I started here was using virus-induced gene silencing to study a particular set of tomato genes. They had narrowed down the resistance region to this region that only had 10 genes in it. And I was in charge of turning them off basically one by one to see which one was actually conferring the resistance so that we could get intellectual property and patent that particular resistance. We also act as diagnosticians of last resort. So globally, people within Bayer ship me leaves, and I am like the last person to try to figure out what in the world is wrong with this plant. I've gotten samples from every single continent except for Antarctica. And I think it's something like 17 to 20 different countries now. So I work with a lot of different people from a lot of different cultures, and that's been a really cool experience. Pathology at Bayer, it's super important. Obviously, we're kind of like a supporting role to what the breeding team does, but without us, like we wouldn't have vegetables basically. There are several thousand different pathogens that can occur on vegetables. We work on, I think, 17 different crops now. And several hundred of these are what we call active pathogens, which means we're either working on finding resistance and getting that into different seeds that we can sell, or we already sell seeds with some level of resistance to this pathogen. And we also export seeds to over 160 countries. And so it's not like we're only caring about what's happening in the United States or what's happening in South America. We have to care about the entire world, all these different regions and all their different pathogen problems. And that's really why we started using high throughput sequencing as a diagnostic tool. And so I want to talk a little bit about the types of problems that high throughput sequencing solves for us. So the first type of problem is when you have a known disease, but you find it in a new place. This happened, I think, back in like 2016. We've got all these melon plants that very clearly they have viral symptoms. I think we would all agree. You look at that and you think virus. And so we ran, a gambit of PCR tests looking at different viruses that we know that melons get, and you came up blank. And so then you're like, well, but it looks pretty virusy, so something is happening here. And we got it high throughput sequenced. And it turns out it's tomato leaf curl nudelli virus. So by the name of the virus, you can tell it was originally known to occur on tomato, and it was originally found in India. So new place, new crop. And I think you maybe would have eventually been able to figure that out with traditional methods, but it would have taken you a really long time to figure it out. It also helps us solve a problem when we just have something totally unknown. I'm sure all of us have been out in a field and we've looked at a plant and we've just thought, man, I have no idea what's wrong with that at all. And of course, pathogens can occur in these really complicated mixed infections and stuff. So maybe you think that like it's fusarium, but also it's tomato yellow leaf curl virus. And high throughput sequencing can pick apart and figure out those nuances. We did kind of like a pressure test experiment once where I took a leaf from every single plant pathology assay that we were running in the greenhouse, which was like 16 different assays. And I was able to detect 14 pathogens simultaneously in that sample, which I thought was pretty cool. And the last problem, which is arguably for a seed company, the worst possible problem you can have, is that sometimes you have disease without symptoms. So there are a couple of different ways that this can happen. One is that the disease hasn't been present in the plant long enough to cause symptoms that are visible to the naked eye. That happens sometimes. Sometimes pathogens are present, but they won't actually show symptoms until a particular like stress event occurs. So maybe like a heat event happens and then all of a sudden it breaks the resistance in the host and it's able to cause a phenotype. And then the third thing is that sometimes we work on these really weird, wild relatives of things that just won't show symptoms. But when you cross it with our traditional, like nice, happy tomato that you would find in the grocery store, then all of a sudden we're having a disease. And our entire job basically as a seed company is to sell people seeds that are disease free. And so if we're accidentally like propagating a disease, that's a real problem for us and it's a real problem for our customers. So we started implementing these really routine high throughput sequencing workflows for all of our greenhouses on site in Woodland. And then I've expanded now. I do this for Woodland, West Sacramento, and 3 different sites in Spain. And next year we're expanding to the Netherlands. So we've been doing this internally for several years now. But all of a sudden we had this kind of cool opportunity thrust upon us where Bayer actually has an internal innovation program, which is called the Catalyst program. And what you can do is you get a group of 2 to 4 people together and you propose some sort of business issue that you think that you have a solution for. And you give some background information and you talk about what the problem is, and you talk about your solution and how it could possibly make money for Bayer, but also be good for our customers. And we all thought that offering this high throughput sequencing based diagnostics to customers would be really beneficial. It's not something that's really on the market yet, at least not at this time in 2018 or whatever when we were doing this. And just the breadth of that diagnostic versus your traditional diagnostics where you can look at like 1 or 2 things at a time is just so different. And so we actually got accepted, like we submitted our idea and we got accepted into the program. And so there are a couple of different things that we did. The first was we actually took an entrepreneurship class, which was not something that I even thought I was interested in. I remember when I was really voluntold to be on this particular project. I didn't like volunteer to be on it or propose the idea in the first place. And so when they were like, you have to do 40 hours of online learning, I was like, what have I been signed up for? I'm confused. And I'm reading about like design thinking and lean startup methodology and like how to write a business canvas plan and all these things. And I'm just like, I'm a scientist. I sit at a bench. I don't understand what this is for. But it turned out to be one of like the coolest experiences that I've had in my career. And it really, I guess, kind of cracked open this whole side of my brain to think about not just what am I doing at the lab bench, but like how does this help the customers directly? And like how can I take something that I have in my head as a scientist? How can I take this idea and actually turn it into an actualized like benefit for people? So our whole entire business value, I guess you would call it, is that we were going to offer this service to growers and use our diagnostic high throughput sequencing based technology. And we would give them not just like, yes or no, you have these different pathogens, but also specific recommendations about what to do about it. So not necessarily like even things that would be beneficial for Bayer, but things like you should really be drip irrigating instead of overhead irrigating, or you should be roguing out the different infected plants in your field or whatever, like IPM strategies. But then also connecting it into kind of the Bayer marketplace is what we were calling it, because obviously we sell a lot of different products. We sell fungicides, we sell like beneficial microbes and stuff like that. So if there's a product or even like a seed product, like maybe you have a horrible virus problem in your field and we have some kind of variety that has a resistance to that, maybe we recommend that next year you plant this other variety instead. And Bayer liked our idea so much that we actually got like 150,000 euros to turn it into a real service for people, which was both challenging but also really fun, because we got to work with a team at Google to actually create a phone app. And so we went through all these different iterations trying to figure out like, what did the app need to do? What did we on the admin side on the back need to be able to see? How can we track samples? How can we give them the best diagnostic information back? Like, what should the formatting be? All of these things. And we were offering this service to actual customers with a lot of success. And we really expanded the number of crops we were working on. Like I work at Bayer in vegetables. So we had like our vegetables and we knew for sure it worked in those, but then now we've done tree crops, grapes, strawberries, all sorts of random things. Even carnivorous plants, people had these in their greenhouse. And so we were like, okay, we'll try it. Why not? The unfortunate thing about working in the industry is that sometimes they make business decisions about your projects and you just have to stop doing them. And that wasn't exactly what happened to us, but they decided that they didn't want to offer this service externally anymore. And so now we just offer this as a service internally, and we have our own little like Bear app store. And this is still available in there. And this is how I get samples from people all around the world still. And we're still constantly innovating and trying to make this better. And we're doing some interesting stuff with disease modeling and disease prediction now as well, which are based on this like idea from the start. So that's the real science heavy part of my talk. Anybody who knows anything about industry, it's pretty tough to get slides approved by legal for me to share things with you, because I work in the discovery team, which means that we really are innovating and we're doing stuff that like nobody else has done before. And so I can't really talk about a lot of what I do, unfortunately. But I was thinking about, what else would I really have liked to see in a seminar when I was a grad student? And I think what will be really helpful is just to talk about some like non-scientific lessons or advice that I have. And hopefully some of this will be useful for you. So the first thing that I want to say is that I think you really get drilled into you, like you have to figure out your 5-year plan. You should know exactly how you're going to move up the corporate ladder. Like career paths are supposed to just be linear and they're supposed to make sense and they're supposed to be super obvious. And that's just totally not true at all. Never believe anyone else that ever tells you that it's like that. So there's this startup company called Own Trail where they allow you to create your actual career path. So you can see that there are some things in here, like in these little books are me going to school or graduating, and the blue things are me like getting jobs or getting a promotion or whatever. But there are other things that really have an impact on your career path. That aren't necessarily things that people usually talk about. So you can see in here, one of the things is this little gray question mark symbol. And I'm using that as saying, like when I got into grad school, I don't know if, I'm assuming this happens to literally everyone, you kind of question like your entire life and your entire purpose. And there are days where you're just like, why did I want to be a plant pathologist? I should have just like quit my job and been a dog groomer or something, But I think that that's an important thing to like acknowledge and recognize, that like you've had a time where you really felt broken down and you figured out at the core, like, what do you want? What do you need? What do you like? What do you hate? What do you want to do? And I don't think people talk about that very often. And you can also see in here, I have a couple of these other gray ones that are like little heart symbols. And so these are things that I would say are, yeah, and also non-traditional impacts. So this one right here is actually when I went to Newark, Delaware, and I had that internship. I told you guys that like I had a great time and I learned a lot scientifically. But what I didn't tell you earlier is that I actually also developed like an anxiety and panic attack disorder while I was there. I had never been away from home before. I went to Purdue, which is like 10 minutes from my parents' house. And it like really, really got to me. And I thought when I went back to Purdue, like everything would be fine. I'm back in my normal life, but that actually isn't what happened at all. I continued to have this particular anxiety trigger for years. And it impacted my career decisions many times. But one example is when I was deciding what grad school I wanted to go to, I was like, I can't be alone somewhere. I tried that and it really didn't work for me. And mentally, like, I don't want to put myself in that situation again. And so I applied only to 2 schools. I applied to Purdue, where I could be close to my family, and I applied to UC Davis because my boyfriend at the time had gotten a position at a company in Sacramento. And so, like, that doesn't mean that my career path was wrong or that I'm doing something that's not like good for me, but I still like, those are things that are impacting your life. And there are some other things in here too, like little red ones. A lot of us have significant others. Their careers impact your career decisions, and that's totally fine. I think people always want to like, you have to be the number one person of your career, but like, I think it's really okay. Like, you have to attach yourself to somebody else, or like if you have kids too, you have to always be thinking about their futures and not just yours. The next thing I want to say is that your gut tells you things for a reason, and you should really listen to it. The more you like allow that little voice in your head, like there's a little voice in your head that says, you really want to work in industry. So then why would you then go get a job in the academia where I wouldn't be as happy? Like, or why would you allow, if your parents, I know I had friends whose parents really wanted them to be a doctor, but like if you hate blood or you hate working one-on-one with patients or whatever, like why are you living your life for somebody else? Like you should be living your life for yourself. And I think people create a lot of struggle internally with their own selves by not listening to their inner voices. And also, like, if your inner voice changes its mind, I think that's okay too. I know that we're scientists and I think we like to like stick to our guns at times, but like if you find new evidence and now your gut is like, actually, I really do want a PhD, like that's totally fine too. Just keep listening to your inner self. There have been a lot of times where my ability to adapt to change has caused me struggle in my life. And it's something that you're really going to have to get used to because it's happening all the time, whether you like it or not. I think in 2020, with COVID, a lot of people really got hit with a huge lifestyle change where like we can't go out, we can't hang out with our family, like otherwise you might literally die. And that caused a lot of us to really be freaked out. And it was partially because we were really resistant to the change at first. It was really scary. We didn't know what it meant. So if, as you're going along and your projects are changing, your team members are changing, your life priorities are changing, like the more you resist the change, the harder it's going to be for you mentally to like continue to thrive. This is kind of an uncomfortable lesson that I had to learn, but I think it's really important. Growth will never ever happen inside your comfort zone. And this diagram does a really great job of explaining that. So like your comfort zone is where you feel safe and happy and in control and like at peace and calm. And right outside of the comfort zone is where there's a lot of fear. You're afraid that people are going to judge you. You're afraid that you're going to not do a good job. You're afraid that maybe you can't do it, you can't learn that skill or whatever. But right outside of the fear is where you really learn and grow. And I have a really good example of that from my career. So when I was a senior in high school, I signed up for the local 4-H fair queen pageant, which again is very Midwestern of me. And so we were at rehearsal, which was the day before the pageant, and you have to walk up to the microphone and be like, "Hi, I'm Abbie Stack and I'm contestant number 5." And then you have to walk in a square around the stage. So not that hard. And there's like basically nobody in the barn. And I like could barely get my words out, and I started shaking so bad that I thought I was gonna like fall off the stage. And I, since that experience, became very afraid of public speaking, to the extent that like I remember in college trying to avoid it at all costs. I remember, having like a pit in your stomach, not being able to sleep the night before. Like this is impacting me. I think it impacted me when I was doing different like job interviews and things like that, because I was worried about, I guess, what other people would think about me, or I'm not sure. And so when I got to Bear, they actually have this internal kind of club. It's called the Woodland Wordsmiths, and it's sort of like Toastmasters International, which is a public speaking organization. And you do little speeches, and each speech that you give has some sort of particular goal. So maybe you're learning how to organize a speech. You're learning about how to use hand gestures to enhance your message. You're learning about how to vary your vocal tone so that people are interested. You're learning how to persuade people, etc. And slowly but surely, I built up basically a history of success for myself at giving speeches. Like I felt like I was just giving little talks to like 20 of my friends at a time. So it's not very high pressure. I know that all the people that are in this club are also terrified of public speaking, which helps a lot when you know that everyone's just as afraid as you. And then like over the course of 3 years, I suddenly found myself in a position where I'm able to give public talks to like all these different types of audiences. I've given a talk at APS on high throughput sequencing, which had like, I don't know, 150 or so scientists in my field who like really know what I'm talking about in the room, which could be really intimidating. But I only got nervous like 5 minutes before, which I think is an appropriate amount of time to feel nervous about something. Or like now when somebody asked me to come give a talk to some students at Iowa State, like here I am with a smile on my face and I didn't get nervous about it. So I just want to say that like there are a lot of things in your life that can be really scary, but if you try to kind of shift your perspective on it on like, well, but what am I going to gain or what am I going to get or how am I going to improve myself by going past that particular fear? I'm also a huge advocate for volunteering and mentoring. And I know the first thought that you have in your head is like, Abbie, I don't have time for that. I'm a grad student. What are you talking about? First of all, hopefully all of you are like doing some kind of at least a little bit of mentoring with like an undergrad in your lab or something like that. That definitely counts for this category. But also there are a lot of really good benefits to volunteering. You can see some of them here, like 96% of people say that volunteering enriches their sense of purpose. Like who doesn't want to have a nice enriched sense of purpose in their life? And I'm not saying that you need to volunteer all the time or spend a ton of time or hours on this. Like what if you just spent 1 hour and you went to your local food bank and you packed meals for Thanksgiving or whatever? Like in that 1 hour, it wasn't a ton for you to give up for yourself, but also you helped so many people in your local community, and that's awesome. And I also think mentoring, so I now run the Sacramento Valley chapter of the Association for Women in Science mentoring program, and I have had people who are afraid to sign up as mentors because they weren't sure if they had enough like knowledge or experience to act as a mentor. And if you're in grad school, I just want you to realize like you've gone through high school, you applied and got into a college, you successfully navigated college, you applied and got in for grad school, you like probably interviewed at some schools, you now have a relationship with a professor, you're doing your own research, and like just that amount of life experience could really benefit somebody who's at those earlier stages of their life experience. And I think people oftentimes feel like as a mentor, you're giving a lot, but you're actually getting a lot in return too. I remember I was having a conversation with one of my mentees and we were trying to create a 5-year plan for her. And she was like, well, what's your 5-year plan, Abbie? And I was like, oh, I don't have one. This isn't about me. This is about you. But then I spent some time. I went home and I spent some time and I thought about my 5-year plan and I came back to her and I'm like, this is what I'm kind of thinking. And so it turns out that she was helping me as much as I was helping her. So I know that it's hard to prioritize, but again, like little bits of time here and there, like you feel like maybe that's not making an impact, and I promise you that it is. Okay, another one, which I think maybe is worded a bit strangely when you think about it, but if you're not trying to be noticed, you won't be. And what I mean by that is like there are so many people in this world who are very smart and they do great work. And I mean, my company has 100,000 employees globally. So like I'm a very small fish in a very big pond. But sometimes you have to really fight for yourself to be heard or claw for things that you feel like are really important to you. A really good example of that. So in my company, if you want to go to a conference, you have to have a business justification. And back in like 2018, I wanted to go to APS in Boston. And so I submitted, I would like to go to Boston. And my business justification is I want to network and I want to learn about new technologies and stuff in plant pathology. And they came back and they were like, that's not good enough of a business justification. We have people who organized sessions or are moderating sessions or are giving a talk, and we have to prioritize giving money to the people who really have obligations to be there. And so then I'm like, but now you have me in this catch-22. Like if I can never go to get involved in things, then how can I get involved to have business justification? It's a catch-22. And so I decided to spend my own money and attend APS in Boston. And while I was there, I made a really big point of trying to get involved in something, which was at the time was the Early Career Professionals Committee. And also while I was there, I made some relationships and networked with some folks, and I ended up being asked or invited to give a talk at that high throughput sequencing based like session the following year in Cleveland. But if I had never gone in the first place, I would have never been noticed or been able to go again. So sometimes you really do have to be your own advocate and like speak up for yourself. Okay, and this is one of my favorite lessons that I've learned, which is that failure doesn't really exist. I think people think of like, if your experiment didn't work, then you failed. But if your experiment didn't work and you learned something from that, then I would call that a success. Or if that experiment didn't work, and so then you had some other type of idea that allowed you to try a different experiment next time, I would say that that's still a success. You succeeded in making progress. You learned how to get up and try again when things are difficult, etc. Like those are successes to me. In industry, we all have these yearly goals, and we have to report at the end of the year our progress on them. And so one year I was working on a project where I needed to implement a virus resistance screening assay, but it needed to be implemented in Salima, Guatemala. And so I developed this whole assay in Woodland and got it working really great. It was beautiful. I had like 93% susceptibility in my controls. And I shipped a whole bunch of stuff to Guatemala. Mind you, these people have like never used pipettes before. I had to ship them pipettes. And I made these little videos, and I had one of my other team members translate it into Spanish so that they would understand what I was doing and how I was doing it. And so I shipped them all the things, and I'm really excited. And they try it out and they get 0 infected plants. And I'm like, oh no, this could be a lot of different factors. Like, is it the sun? Is it their technique? Is it their plants are too big? Are their pots different? Like, there could be so many different things, humidity, temperature, yeah, on and on. And so we designed a couple more experiments to try to control for different things. And in each of these successive experiments, we also got 0% infectivity. And I got so desperate that I wasn't allowed to actually travel to Guatemala, by the way. I had to do all of this remotely. And there was someone else on the Woodland site who was going to travel there. So I trained him and had him go and watch the people in Salima to see if they were doing it right and make sure that, like, if not, then he could train them. And we still got 0% infectivity. And this is really important to the business, that we can be able to screen for this virus. Like, it's really important in this region. And so I'm like, man, we failed. Like, we literally can't do this. This is impossible. But we then decided to try to just do it the old school way, using whiteflies instead. And that has worked out really, really great. But for that year, for that particular year, I had to write my goals. We got 0% infectivity in Salima over 4 or 5 experiments. But that didn't mean that I failed. Like, we never gave up. We still kept trying. And also sometimes working in the discovery role, like, I do things that are scientifically impossible. And it's okay if at the end of the year I'm like, well, I tried a lot of stuff and it's scientifically impossible. Like, that's also still an answer and not a failure. That's a success. We learned something. Second to last thing that I have to say is that your mental health should be more important to you than like borderline anything else in the entire world. Mental health is something that a lot of people don't want to talk about. They feel like ashamed about it, or you don't want to be vulnerable with people. Or, also you can change, like, some days are good, some days are really bad. But if you aren't actively trying to keep yourself in a good mental health state, like, your work and your relationships and everything else is going to suffer from that. And I would really suggest that if you are having some kind of mental health problem, that you go talk to somebody about it. Like, even just like a friend who can be a trusted confidant, but also like your professor, if you want to talk to them about it and how it's impacting your ability to do your science. A lot of schools have, psychology resources, therapy resources for you. Like, seriously, go get help, because getting a piece of paper that says that you're really smart, you have a PhD, is not worth it if you're going to come out and have like horrible mental health problems as a result. And obviously I already shared with you, like I used to have a really bad anxiety and panic attack disorder. Like I'm not ashamed of that. Like a lot of people have a lot of mental health problems. And I mean, we're all doing our best all the time. That's all we can do. And the last thing that I want to leave you with is that you should try to find what I'm going to call your people. And I think that this is just kind of like a feeling, like it's again, kind of like a gut feeling that you have when you're in a group of people and you just feel really supported by them or loved by them or accepted by them. You can show up as like your full self. They don't judge you, etc. And I'm really lucky because my team at Bear has been very much in my corner for my entire career. This is a really cute picture of us. We all put up this like just absolutely ridiculous Teams background. And we've learned that this is really fun for if your team's having just like any meeting, if you all put up a silly background, it kind of makes everybody just feel happy inside. And also I think like there are so many differences between us. Like people come from all over the world. We have different views on all sorts of different topics. But like if you get to like sit down and get to know these people, there are always more things that are similar than that are different. Or you can find, you know, a common value or a common passion or a common interest. There's always something there. And yeah, I would encourage you that if you don't feel like you currently have anyone that you would refer to as your people, like go out and try to find some people who are supportive of you. And that's really all that I have to say. Yeah, thanks again for inviting me. And I'm happy to answer questions about both science and non-science if anyone has any questions.
Thank you, Abbie. Questions for Abbie?
Hi, Abbie. Hand up. Yeah, there you go.
Thank you for the presentation. I really like it. I have a question for you regarding if there is any set of skills that you think that you didn't have until you started working and that you wish to have in grad school.
Yeah, I think, well, I mean, related directly to like science type of skills, I really wish that I had done any sort of bioinformatics in grad school. That would have helped me a lot with what I do in my job now. But I also think that in general, when we hire people, we kind of assume that pretty much everybody has kind of like a base level of wet lab skills or diagnostic skills when you come out of a program. And so what we really care more about are some of the soft skills. Like, are you a good scientific communicator? Do you have good attention to detail? Are you, you know, cognizant of time management and project management, things like that? I feel like, I mean, yeah, in grad school, I worked on a fungus of trees, and then for some reason they hired me to be basically a virus researcher of vegetables. Like those things are so different. But yeah, your attitude and like how you get along with the team matters a lot more than I think your base skills.
Thank you.
Hi, Abbie. Thank you for the presentation. I had a question about the discovery position that you have. Is that also located in other areas around the United States, not just in California? I'm
Yeah,
looking
good
to
question.
move towards like North Carolina, Florida areas. So I'm wondering if there's anything there.
Yeah, good question. So the discovery pathology team for vegetables, we have people stationed in Woodland, El Ejido, which is in Spain, and Bergenhoek in the Netherlands. But we do have row crop pathology as well, and most of their operations are based out of St. Louis, Missouri. We used to have people at Felda, Florida, which is yeah, kind of down south in Florida, and we got rid of our pathology activities there. There are a lot of jobs that are like related to pathology, but that aren't necessarily traditional pathology as well. Like we have seed pathology that happens in Ankeny, Iowa, and we have people who are stationed in like Research Triangle Park, for example, but oftentimes you would be more on like a product development type of role, which is still related to pathology, but also related to like plant genetics and things like that. So there are really a lot of different types of opportunities. We actually have a few open positions right now too, for anybody if you're about to graduate. There are a couple open in Woodland. If you look them up, I think one of them is called like laboratory operations manager, and the other one is like laboratory technical coordinator, something like that. They're a little bit generic. And we expect to hopefully open another like pathology research type position, which potentially would be a discovery scientist role, which would be a PhD level sometime next year. And that would be based in Woodland.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
So Abbie, what's your 5-year plan?
It's funny you asked that. So I actually recently have been thinking a lot about that, and I'm pretty strongly considering going back to get my PhD now, actually. And so I started applying to some programs, and yeah, we'll see. But there's definitely a difference between what you can do with a master's and what you can do with a PhD in industry, I would say. So if you want to have a master's degree, those things are more like you do the science, you manage projects, but you don't generally get to manage teams of people unless you've been around for a very long time. And you don't necessarily get to inform the strategies or anything like that. And so having a PhD could really behoove you for some of those types of activities if you're interested in that. But I am also potentially interested in taking like a more scientist level role. Yeah, time will tell.
Thank you.
Other questions? Abbie, I have a question. So you talked, really enjoyed your presentation about like the tips, the things you've learned. So I'm wondering, like at an industry level, from your experience, are there a lot of opportunities or training in like work-life balance and mental health or community building opportunities? Is that something that's valued, at least in your experience from the companies you worked in?
Yeah. So from an outreach perspective, we each get 16 hours of paid time to do outreach. So you can take that in as big or small chunks as you want. I often use that for different AWIS events. And we have a whole team in Woodland, and we also have teams at all of our sites that are focused on community outreach, which is really awesome. And then as far as like mental health and things like that, some of our benefits for that are really nice. Like we have the ability to find therapists and things like that. I personally have been really open with my team. If I need to take a mental health day, I will like specifically call that out. I'll be like, I'm taking Friday off as a mental health day. Like, please don't email me. And I think because I've been really open and really brave about it, other people on my team have now been really open as well. Like you'll notice that if you're vulnerable with people, they're more willing to be vulnerable with you. And we also have internal like business resource groups is what we call them for different sorts of categories. Like we have a women's one and we have a families one. We have some different like ethnic ones. We have an Asian scientist society. We have like an LGBTQIA society. And I think that a lot of those business resource groups are really good places for, yeah, they often will give different seminars about mental health and how to support your family and different resources and stuff like that. I feel like in industry you get a pretty decent balance as far as work and life too. Like when I used to not even take my laptop home before COVID because I always worked on site. I would leave my laptop there and I wouldn't check my email. And when you go on vacation, like sometimes people will go on vacation for an entire month and we're like, okay, we got it. We'll see you. Have fun. And like nobody complains or freaks out about that. And I think that that's really important.
Oh, thanks. Great.
You're making industry sound really attractive, Abbie. Let me know when that new position.
We'd love to have you.
I doubt it, but thank you.
Yeah, if you really like, I think there are some pretty big differences between academia and industry. Like in industry, we have a very high level of funding to do things. Like when I was in grad school, we had to do all these jerry-rigged DNA extraction methods where I made magical complicated buffers. And now at my job, I'll drop, $10,000 on flow cells and nobody blinks an eye, which is really nice because scientifically, I think that gives me a lot more freedom and access to, ideas that I would like to try, things like that. We pay pretty well. We have decent benefits.
All right. Well, if there are no other questions, we'll thank Abigail for speaking to us today. It was a great seminar. Thanks for allowing us to record it. So we will share it in our website. I see a lot of clapping hands. That was a great talk, and we'll see you around.
Thanks.
Abbie.
Thanks for having me.
Great
Thanks
talk.
so much. Yeah, great talk.
Bye.
Bye.